Welcome to Independence for America with your host, Mike Cantwell.
Welcome to another episode of Independence for America. At Independence for America, we tell the stories of independent candidates and independent elected leaders. My guest today is Owen Casas. Owen is a Marine Corps veteran who ran as an independent for the Maine state legislature. Owen, welcome to Independence for America.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate being on.
Well, last time we met in person was 2018 at the Unite Summit in Denver. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But first, I want you to share with our viewers and our listeners, a little bit about your childhood and some of your decisions to join the Marine Corps, and then what did you do in the Marine Corps?
Sure. So I grew up in Maine, a little town, kind of middle of the woods. I'm the youngest boy, so I'm kid number 9 of 10 kids, and only one to actually go into the military. So it wasn't like a huge, I had some uncles and some grandparents that had fought in previous conflicts, but it wasn't something that was any sort of central fixture to my upbringing. Really awesome upbringing, just like as far as I'm concerned. Good values, good activities. Spent a lot of time outside. Wasn't really super keen on school, which seemed to kind of like make sense. Over time, you develop your personality, and it's not necessarily lack of love of learning. It's a setting, and what captures your attention or not. So I puttered through school until I graduated, which I did. I graduated, yay! And I had spent quite a bit of time, again, just out in the woods, playing soldier, and there wasn't too many. I don't want to say too many prospects, because I had a lot of options, but as I saw it, the military had always kind of made sense, and this was post 9/11. So I graduated in 2002, and I joined the Marine Corps in 2003, and we took Baghdad when I was in boot camp. So, and then I actually spent quite a bit of time in the Marine Corps before I deployed to Iraq ultimately. So that was interesting. But no, as far as like my childhood, just like a really awesome childhood. Good role models, good influences, hard work ethic. Really just feel fortunate that I was given that kind of foundation.
So we have viewers from all over the country, and I live in a very urban area. You probably heard the fire engine go by and everything. Can you tell us like what it's like in your part of Maine, and what are some of the towns or cities where you live? Maybe some of the economic challenges of the area that you live.
Maine you can kind of break it down into like similar areas. So Aroostook County is the largest county east of the Mississippi, and it's basically almost like everything north of Bangor. Yet along the coast, it's beautiful, good rocky coast, and a lot of wealth around the coast. Wealth a little bit inland around kind of like our lakes region. There's good opportunities here in Maine, but there are absolutely pockets that are economically depressed. We had relied pretty heavily on the timber industry for a long time, and the competition with Chinese paper and stuff like that. Really, the mills have struggled, and so a mill town, mill closes, that really affects that region, and even further it radiates out. And we've had so many that kind of like built on each other. But really, it's beautiful here. It's one of those things that you kind of grow up around here. For me, anyway, spending a lot of time in the woods, hiking. I guess it does. We can talk about it later, but that rugged, I guess, Maine ethic, how you kind of like never really know if that big storm's going to blow in and if the roads are going to be cleared. And so that leads to this self reliance, aka independence, the ability to do and accomplish things for yourself. So when it came to politics after the military, it didn't seem like a choice, because of how I was raised. It made a lot of sense to be politically independent.
All right, let's roll right into that. So you get out of the Marine Corps, you come back home. I think you said you went to college for a little bit. And did you then what? How did you decide to run, and why did you decide to run as an independent and not as a Republican or Democrat?
During college is when politics started becoming more within my sphere, things that I was actually thinking about, things that were becoming a bit more intimate to my life, understanding. I hadn't really voted. I didn't voted until I got out of the Marine Corps. Um, Actually, I think it was a handful of years after that as well. The military was super helpful in building a level of maturity and responsibility um, to my job. And again, great influences, good role models growing up. So was able to kind of do like a mental shift and say, college is now my job. They're paying me to go to school.
Hmm.
And I pride myself on being good at my job. So now I have to be good at this. And turns out you're able to pick the classes and the things that you find kind of interesting, it can be super fun. And you can develop skills and ways of approaching things that can be far more pleasing, enjoyable, and yeah, developed a really strong kind of love of learning. I there was like a bit of a distinct shift towards politics. I've been gearing almost everything that I've been doing in my undergraduate towards wind energy, specifically offshore wind power. So this new fascination, kind of coupled with making sense of Iraq, trying to better understand what is Americans' foreign policy. Like, what the heck was that all about? I blanked it, like I don't want to care at this time as a active duty service member. So
So
yeah,
can you
yeah.
tell me a little bit about your 2014 race and then your 2016 race?
So 2014 definitely felt and knew that that wasn't like a winnable race. Maine has term limits, so you can do 4 non-consecutive terms. So you could take a little time off and then run again, but you can only do 4 terms consecutively. The representative for Camden, Rockport, and Islesboro, Maine at that time was going into her 4th term. And so, in addition to her having done a good job as far as the community was concerned, and myself in policy areas that we agreed on, it was more get your name out there, go through the motions of a campaign, build out what the campaign infrastructure is. There is no um, there are no consultants that come in and say, hey, Republican candidate, hey, Democratic candidate, here's the playbook, here's the voter list, here's this, here's that, this is when you need to file this is when you need to file that. And you don't have that kind of built-in usership, if you want to call it that, but that base that you can kind of count on, and you're trying to get that center votes to put you over the edge. So, going into 2014, definitely knew that highly unlikely to win it, and there was a Republican in that race as well. So it was a 3-way race. Um, but I think I got like 33%, somewhere around there. So I got like a third of the
Not
vote.
not bad for a first time candidate. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, I was kind of listening to some of going over your podcasts. So when you were saying how much you enjoyed campaigning and how much you enjoyed talking with people, I resonated a lot with that because for me anyway, the approach of an independent, or my brand of being an independent, um, really built on engagement and trying to learn from others. And how did you get to where you're at? Is there a study? Is there a bit of information that I am deficient on that I need to gather from you that helps me, you know, get to the best opinion? Like reasonable people can have different opinions, and I'm not an AI computer thing. I can only read so much. I'm a flawed human being. Like my job is to learn and to grow, and always challenge myself and figure out what is the best decision you can make at this time with these inputs. So yeah, it was super fun. Didn't have to worry about like skipping over houses. I did the same thing that
So you
you
mentioned
did.
you. It sounds like you read what
Pick
you
a
listened to
street,
what I
man.
said about skipping over houses. I talked to everybody just like you did.
Yeah, and you become far more in tune with your community, and if you're approaching it with humbleness, humility, curiosity, and respect, uh, you know some simple things like when you're knocking on their door and they have like the couple of steps that lead to the door with the little, like I knock on the door and then I walk down the like a
Hmm.
steps a little bit. Like this is your house. I give them the space that they need to open the door, and like I'm asking for your engagement, because like I want you to ask questions and learn so much about me, and I might have some questions for you if you have time. So yeah, really really enjoyed that, and after that
Did you guys have
race,
any debates?
yes. Yep.
You had some
I don't
debate.
really. I had debates in all three of them. If I honestly am like would be super rusty on like how any of the ones in that 2014 um, campaign went. That wasn't the one. I had a hot mic one time, and I was talking with someone who's like a friend, and I'm not gonna like recount the story because it's a silly story. But the point of it was again, you were the next house. Like that's, I got some feedback that maybe, like this is how you were viewing it. Sorry, you were just the next house, like but yeah, the debates were super fun. After that campaign, got a lot of encouragement to run for the local select board here in Maine. We do a lot more on the municipal level and a lot less on the county level. So municipalities, towns, and cities have various ways they can organize their government. The really common one is town meeting form of government, where you have a select board, that's the executive branch, and then the legislative branch is actually the citizenry, so it's the voting. Those registered to vote within that municipality can come and vote on the budget and ordinances and things like that. So I ran for the Rockport Select Board um, in 2015 and served on there for 3 years, which
Oh,
so there was a little overlap where I was both on the Rockport Select Board and the state legislature.
so tell me about you winning in 2016, and and it was a really really close race, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
ultimately you go to the state house and you serve for 2 years. So tell me a little bit about that and what an independent brings to the table in a state like Maine.
Sure. So, you know, I guess one of the ways that I like to put it is this community has really benefited from some really great candidates that have resonated with a lot of folks. And I'm not talking about me, like these folks that I ran against. I always kind of viewed it not as me running against someone else, but as, us as competitors in the thought space to, like display our vision for the community, and just makes it easier mentally. So had a really great competitor in candidate in 2016, and there was a lot of Republican turnout. This was President Trump's election, and we did not have a Republican in my race at that time. independents typically, um, from Maine and other places, they're typically more left leaning, potentially so far left leaning that they don't feel comfortable in the Democratic Party. And so I am very much more centrist. I do have a lot of fiscal things that the Republican position makes a lot more sense. So the Republicans made a decision to not have a candidate and not support anyone in my district race. So that really was that little teeny bit that helped kind of get me over the edge. Because again, another great candidate, also resonating with the community.
Mhm.
So went in. I was put on the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee, which is an interesting choice. I thought it was awesome. I wanted to be on energy and utilities, but Veterans and Legal Affairs is the election committee, which I didn't quite realize at the time. And some questioned why an independent would be put on the elections committee. Like, aren't they going to, you know, do these type things? And I did, and it was fun, to kind of engage. Uh, I started to build out even more depth of understanding and knowledge around elections because I'd been like a candidate at that point. I'd been the one filling out the forms and filing the forms to get on the ballot. And now we're overseeing and we're getting briefings from Secretary of State, Assistant Secretary of State, the elections clerks. I'm asking a lot more questions. So really getting this kind of like deep dive into on the state end. And we were actually doing ranked choice voting, the implementation at that time. And that's a
Right.
whole, happy to talk more about that. I, I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting. There were aspects of the implementation from the state end that I was a little disappointed there weren't good answers from some of the ranked choice voting advocates, custody of care, the thumb drives and things like that. Ultimately, we ironed all of that out. Everything worked out well. They've been going great in the state of Maine, and I continue to be a really strong supporter of ranked choice voting. It was just really
Well, I mean,
interesting to have that additional perspective.
Maine was the first, right? So at least from a state level, and so the rest of the country benefited from what Maine was doing, and there's going to be with anything new, there's going to be hiccups at first. But I think you guys have worked collaboratively to solve those problems, and now you have Alaska and other places. So and then here in Arlington, we're implementing it at the county level. But yeah, it is interesting when you have to work with the state election board and you have to iron out all those challenges. It is a little bit challenging, but in my mind, it's worth it. So tell me why you support ranked choice voting, independent redistricting commissions, and also nonpartisan primaries.
We could take each one, like piece by piece, and why they're necessary. I think just kind of the overarching reason for trying to push some of these reforms is because when you explain it to your run of the mill awesome citizen, they totally understand why these things make sense when you start talking about disclosures and money and like how people get into positions of authority. You start speaking in like general specifics, if that makes any kind of like sense, but you're also leaving out all of the political who's what's it's, right? You're just explaining this kind of like basic equation and it has very limited factors in it. That's like the question that's being asked of you. And then I just found that if you come from like a political party, then you add a lot more factors into your equation. It grows much larger. And that's what I kind of think of as the political swirl.
Hmm.
Um, and so I wish that we didn't have to do some of these citizens initiated reforms, and that politicians would be a bit more receptive and responsive when they get feedback about this, or that they might see some of the polling about their favorability. Uh, but it's really because I don't know. It's weird. I feel like, yeah, as an independent, and which like sounds kind of silly, but just like as a free thinker and someone who really is on this journey to try to learn and grow and be, curious and all that stuff. Boy, you can get into like unknown, unforeseen arguments with people all the time because they think you're being critical of their special thing. And I'm trying to figure out if your thing is still awesome and special and we should protect it, or if your thing has gone a little wonky. It's like, no, my thing hasn't. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Again, we're flawed humans. Our stuff goes wonky all the time. Like, we have great intentions and we build things, and then we come to find out that, like, yeah, putting pesticides in a small application works great. Loading it onto a plane and broadcasting it liberally doesn't. Like, okay, call it a loss. Like, how do we correct from that? But people will dig in and say, this is how it needs to be done. And so having some reforms so that our government is more responsive, so that people, um, you know, feel confident that when an issue goes to it, it will be taken seriously. You know, big issues go up there and you can kind of look at it and make a really good guesstimation as to how much of a political circus it's going to become. And that's like just that's like all the taxpayer resources being consumed for a perpetuation of a discussion that really no one has like a strong desire to actually resolve, because it doesn't benefit them necessarily to resolve it. But I am painting with a very broad brush there. And I do just want to really highlight that my time in the legislature, some of the best people that I've worked with, they're really awesome folks, kind hearted. People will call these people just like bleeding heart liberals, and they have no concept about anything but money and this and that. And then, but you actually really spend some time with them. They've got a great nuanced, like outlook on things. They just prioritize this other stuff far more than these factors. I'm not anti-business. I'm just like super pro environment.
Hmm.
And then like these
And
people,
by the way,
they're,
we can be both in many cases, right? So,
yeah.
um, you did mention that you did watch my Stories of Service podcast, and what are your thoughts about local, local, local? Because I really do think that is our savior. Is people really, really getting, kind of return to the past of getting involved in your community, going to your civic associations, running for school board or, town board or something like that. I think that's going to save us from the really, really bad situation that we're in nationally, is people to re-engage with their neighbors at a local level.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I would say, in addition, I think that would be a lot easier if our elected leaders on that echelon, that federal level, set a tone and tenor that made some of these folks that do associate with a political party and do want to engage on the local end, they're feeling the encouragement to listen to others, and they're feeling the encouragement to work with the other side, um, and still have their affiliation strongly and firmly within their chosen party. What I've seen is, especially up here in Maine, because it's super unfamiliar to us, like, having party politics, having partisanship is not something that we do on the local end. Just so, for example, I don't know how you all do it, and because every state can do it their own way, and sometimes the states allow the locals to do it however they want. But Maine doesn't have anyone running on the local end as a party candidate. You might know that that person is a registered Democrat or Republican, But when they run on the local end, there is no DRI next to their name. And when they do their work, there is no party affiliation with that. That's really staved off a lot of the partisanship because, you still have that grocery store conversation, and you do have to have that level of civility because if you have your kids and you're in produce, having that person in front of your kids, this is why you suck, that's tough. Like nobody wants that. And you can distance yourself from that the more distance you put between your constituents and you.
So
Um,
here in Virginia, the most of the local offices by law, you cannot have your party affiliation next to your name on the ballot. So the parties can go through a nominating process. They can have caucuses. They can have a primary. But on that general election ballot for the local races, they cannot have a D or an R or an I next to their names. And every single year in the Virginia State Legislature, the General Assembly, there is a state representative or a state senator that tries to change that law. And every year in the last 3 years, myself and others have personally testified to oppose it. And these laws have been this close to getting passed. They're going to bring it up again this year, too. And one thing I bring up a lot, and again, we're outside the nation's capital, we have tens of thousands of federal government employees, is that you immediately um, disallow a federal government employee from running for a local office, which is just wrong, right? And so I usually bring that up. I use also let's say you're a military member, served proudly for 20 years, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to retire from the military and I'm going to run for my local office. Well, you know that it takes a good year to like start your campaign before the election. So if you're still in uniform and you're running for a partisan office, that has an I or a D or an R next to their names, you can't do that. That's illegal, the Hatch Act and everything, right? So every year I'm going to keep fighting the state reps who try to make our local politics more partisan, because I think you and I agree that we actually want our local elected officials to be less partisan, not more partisan.
and there's like so many really interesting, topics to talk about. I don't really know exactly how you kind of want to guide and shape this, but I did find it interesting because I was also a town administrator. So I did that for 2 years in a small coastal town. So I had a select board that told me what to do, and I offered recommendations and gave guidance and then
Mm-hmm.
actioned things out. And that included um, conducting the elections and then receiving communications about caucuses with the party folks, and so it was really a fun experience almost because I'd like, hey, I'm not here to put a stick in your spokes, right? I'm not super pie in the sky. I'm gonna change the world overnight, right? Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
have a two-party system specified anywhere in our constitution, any of the
Right.
amendments, like any of that stuff. And yet, let's look at reality here, So, um, but it was really interesting having the experience I had coming into it and saying, what are you going to? You're going to cover the cost of cleanup, right? And being able to kind of inject that level of conversation amongst other municipal folks that hey, I respect everything that the parties want to do, and but it is an exclusive private club that they ask for a certain amount of membership because I can't participate unless I'm a member of their club, and yet they are consuming my and others non-parties taxpayer dollars to conduct their activities. What gives? That's one of the few arguments that I've really felt has resonated with just a lot more folks than certain other arguments have.
Reforms. Yeah.
Well, because you can start saying these like old timey things like no taxation without representation. It's like, hurrah, because it's about as simple as you can get.
Well, you hit on
All
the head. So,
taxpayers paying for something that you are not allowed to participate in unless you register.
so political parties are private gain-seeking organizations. Um, and we follow each other on social media, and frequently I'll post the same thing over and over, which is government should neither fund nor run partisan political primaries, right? Um, I'm actually not for open primaries because primaries are government run and taxpayer funded. Um, I think they should go run caucuses or something like that, or better yet, we have nonpartisan primaries, like they do in Alaska now, which is the top four primaries, right? So I want to skip over from closed primaries to nonpartisan primaries. A lot of people disagree with me. They want that interim step of having open primaries, but we know the political parties play the game of, Democrats voting in Republican primaries and Republicans voting in Democratic primaries. So I think having these open primaries are sometimes open to manipulation. Sometimes.
No, it's one of those when you start pulling the string in the ball of yarn, and you never quite know where it's going to make the knot on the other side. And again, it always seems to kind of get me in trouble sometimes because I'm legitimately fascinated by things like because there's a different open primary kind of uh, set of doing things that does have some other potential to add value, but it has some drawbacks too. It's basically you you couldn't leave your party and then go and register in the other party within a certain time frame to attempt to prevent some people jumping over. And the only folks that really had flexibility to have and enjoy an open primary were those unenrolled voters who had been unenrolled for a certain period of time, and they were allowed to make a decision to participate in one or the other. But there's drawbacks with that, and there's benefits with so top five and doing it on the end and not on and all these things are really interesting. I think what I found separated I don't want to say separated me from other folks, but separated, um, there were less pressures to, at the end of a thinking thought process exercise, to fall within the party's position. I could go through these thought exercises and I fell wherever it made the most
Right.
sense to fall. Um,
And
and
serving
the
your constituents too. Serving your
right.
constituents. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
let's fast forward. So I didn't get reelected in 2018 because a handful of different reasons. One, just kind of like side note, but maybe you don't mess with the school board. Um, in my role on the Rockport Select Board, was on a building committee for the school board as the Rockport representative, while also in the state legislature and running for reelection. And I had concerns about the multiple different financial tools that they were utilizing to still get the same construction design, even though costs had increased. And so I got characterized as the person who didn't want to see the new middle school be built, even though, from my perspective, I was a full participant, um, but was concerned about X, Y, and Z. I've got 6 kids, right? Like they're all going to this school. I'm not anti public
you're not
education.
anti-kids, not anti-public
Yeah,
education, right?
so that was it was just like it was just a small thing. Um, but school boards are exceptionally powerful. They have a huge email list. Like don't mess with the school board. Just don't do it. Also, Camden, Rockport, Islesboro does lean a bit more left, more Democrat than maybe my politics are. So I had worked with Governor LePage, who's a Republican, nearing the end of our sessions, and even though it was something that I had vetted through a lot of folks within the community and actually was in response to constituents. It was about a lodging tax, and we had a bunch of bed and breakfasts on the
Right.
coast. Um, like just the fact that I had worked with the governor was held against me, regardless, of these things. So, uh, and especially there was a pretty strong reaction to President Trump in that
In
midterm.
2018, yeah.
Yes. So another really strong, great Democratic candidate to kind of like step up for the community. The community was blessed again with good candidates as far as I was concerned, and yeah, did not win that one. And that's actually when I went to go be the town administrator in a town called South Thomaston.
All right, well, let's wrap things up a little bit here. What is some advice you would have for somebody who's thinking about running for office and they're like, hey, I might run as a Democrat or Republican, or maybe I'll run as an independent. What advice would you give that? And let's just stick to local or state politics, not, federal or presidential.
Um, the first thing that I tell all candidates is like this is a regardless. uh, Before your race really starts. You've done your filing, maybe some stuff, the ball's rolling a little bit, but really as soon and as early in the process as you can, sit down with your loved ones, like whatever that looks like for you, your situation.
Hmm.
Sit down and go over who you are and who you like want to be at the end of your campaign, and start doing the best job that you can about the things you've heard that candidates are asked to do by the consultants or party folks, um, negative ads, statements that you might make about your opponent, and define at that time, like before the campaign, who am I? Like when my kids read about this stuff online when they're older, and they find those old ads and stuff like that, who are they going to see? And is that the type of person that I've tried to raise my kids to be, and the example I want to be like for my kids? So think long and hard about that. Define your do's and your don'ts in the military, your left and right lateral limits, and then stick to it. Because as things go on and you get closer and closer to election day, stresses, pressures, that person's op-ed, all these little things really start breaking you down. And I think decision making at that time can become flawed, and we can be these not great versions of ourselves that we might absolutely regret not too long after a win or a loss. Like, it doesn't matter, man. That negative thing's out there. So that's the first thing that I'm always trying to get people, like, nothing against the consultants, nothing against the people that are paid to give advice, but I've received a lot of it. And just the disappointing thing is a lot of that advice that I think sucks. It works, it does actually work, which is disappointing and a whole another
Yeah,
thing
like
to talk
negative
about.
campaigning. Yeah.
Um, yeah, hard. You just got to have that hard talk about how much they're willing to work and what they are willing to accept and give up, and to just make sure, like, honestly, I would probably try to prep someone with really good questions to talk with the other party that they might be considering. Hey, have you asked them about this? Have you asked them about that? What are their thoughts on this after you get elected? What's their command plan for this? Are they going to ask you to commit your vote to constitutional officers? Are they going to ask you to do this? Are they going to ask you to do that? And then have them go and engage in that conversation. I bet that would be a wild conversation,
Hmm.
with a lot of questions that party folks are not familiar with receiving. And then let that person come back. And maybe that's off putting enough, to have to fit within the constraints of being an elected party member, that the additional hard work and the resources you don't get during the campaign, because there's the campaigning and then the governing. And when you accept certain things for the campaigning, You don't have to, but there is a strong expectation that that follows through into the governing, which in certain senses makes sense. Like if you're talking about a policy position, but when you're talking about things that the general public doesn't know about because it's private between the candidate and the party, those are the type commitments that just perpetuate this really us underperforming on the wins for the constituents.
Well, that's a good place to end because I'm all about helping independent candidates win local and state office. And you are one of the examples of someone who ran, won, and served. So that's we want to replicate that throughout the country. Is really what the goal is. And it's obvious that you're a super thoughtful guy, and I think there's been a theme in what you've been saying is that you're a very curious person. So have you ever heard about Monica Guzman? She's with Braver Angels, I believe.
Maybe the name's
And she's written a book
slightly
and
familiar.
everything, but she's kind of boiled things down to how we can get out of this toxic partisan doom loop. And really, it comes down to curiosity. And when you enter a conversation being truly curious about, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about you. I want to understand you and your issues a little bit more. That's really half the battle of getting out of this toxic doom loop.
So, you know how I said, like, I was raised by really awesome people, good upbringing, good examples. So I'll boil this down as quickly as I can. So I get back from Iraq, finishing up my time, about to get out of the service, and my mom makes the decision to basically adopt a boy from Afghanistan. And I'm like, okay, cool. I got like this Afghan brother, and I had an Afghan brother. Like, what do I do with that? Like, I had just come from like a place where if you looked and walked and talked a certain way, you were a potential threat. And that had nothing to do with how I felt about that person. That was just the situation of being in Fallujah. Like, what do
In
you
combat,
know?
yeah.
And so it's like, all right, well, this is different. I've gone through this process. I'm not in combat anymore. I'm like back home. And okay, what can I learn from this person that I'm feeling a little funny and I don't want to feel funny. And there's all kinds of awesome stories about Brother Assad, but when he started having better war stories than me, I was like, hey, all right, like, tell me more. And the breaking down of these stigmas that we have, the culture that they've built over a long, long time, um, boy, it's benefited me in my life. Just like generally, I am just a much better person for having this very personal example of what you can do to fear when you step outside of your own comfort zone and you're vulnerable with someone and you say, this is, I think it's almost a biological, genetic, chemical thing here. This is how I'm feeling. Can you help me understand this? And like, I've had some of the best conversations by being really upfront with folks that were raised and look way different than me because I'm like, genuinely, I want to understand why is it that we feel in these ways. So this is just a little shout out to what you can get from curiosity if channeled, I think, in a positive way where you're doing it specifically. You know, sometimes you don't find good things. Sometimes like that exploration nets you feeling sad and nets you, like looking at someone else and being very disappointed, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns and stuff, but 3/4 of the time, if not more, if that was a batting average, that's pretty good, you know. So it's been fun.
Hey, I really look forward to meeting you in person sometime when you come down to DC, or maybe someday I'll come up to Maine. And I really, we need to continue this journey of helping independent candidates, win, run, and serve. And hopefully we can have a few more of those, especially in Maine and here in Virginia. So, Owen, it was super talking to you today. And if you want to learn more about the independence movement, just Google Independence for America and learn a little bit more. So that's all for now. See you later. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Mike.